தமிழரின் பிம்பம் உங்கள் டிவி.
Welcome to CrossRoads on TVI. I'm Parthik Kandaval. Dear viewers, on behalf of TVI, we wish you all a happy Easter. Given today's occasion and the recent selection of the new Pope, Pope Francis I, we'll be discussing these matters and the Catholic Church in general today on CrossRoads. Joining me in this discussion are Shobana Xavier, a PhD student at Wilfrid Laurier University, Veena Philip, third-year biomedical science student at the University of Waterloo, and Quintus Thuresingam, who is a community activist. Welcome. Thank you for coming on CrossRoads on this, special day, taking time away from the church as well as your families, I imagine. So this day has a lot of meaning. It's a very powerful day. What does it mean to you personally, the day of Easter?
I can start off. So the way I see it is we hear about all these amazing love stories throughout our entire lives, like Romeo and Juliet and just all these amazing love stories. I think that this is just another one of those amazing love stories of Jesus' love for each and one of us as Catholics. He gave up his life for our salvation. And it's just amazing how much love one person can have for another unconditionally. And even when we did have him, when he was hanging on the cross, he still wanted us to be forgiven for what we were doing to him.
Actually, it's a big celebration for Christians, particularly for Catholics, because of the risen Christ. The third day he rose again. That's the message we get, which is justice prevailed. That's why we celebrate that, because of that total persecution and death and crucifixion, which is a sad story there. And people thought that he's dead, finished, done. But on the third day, by rising again, justice prevailed, and justice over injustice is the most important message there. Whether after 3 days or 3 years or 30 years or 60 years, in our case, justice will prevail. That is the good message.
Do you think there's a connection to us as Tamil people?
Most definitely, not only with Tamils, with any community around the world. The message is that some or other justice will prevail. That's a good message that we also celebrate on this day.
And Shobana, how do you interpret it? As a personal or as a collective?
Well, I think Easter, we often talk about from a Christian and Catholic perspective. We sometimes get overwhelmed and think about Christmas. But I think Easter for Catholics and for Christians is the culmination and the climactic moment of a very powerful story. And especially historically, if you think the personage of Jesus, as both panelists have highlighted, what was his role on earth and his divinity and his sacrifice. And Easter, the services that kind of have been highlighted and which we've been seeing on the news and in Vatican and across the churches. Easter with the starting of Palm Sunday, the story of that, with Holy Thursday, which we saw, the Pope washing the feet of, women in Muslim for the first time, which is very, radical, but also very important. Then Good Friday, being the death of Jesus is when that is commemorated. And the resurrection, this Holy Week is the most important time for Christians and Catholics. And it is very symbolic, but also very viscerally felt for them and very important. And they partake of the suffering of Jesus as they understand it, but they also partake in the resurrection, this idea that Jesus has come back to life again and salvation and what that means. And so there's various personal interpretations and various ways in which that is enacted with people. But the role it plays in the church for Christians and Catholics is the climactic, the moment, right?
And arguably the most important day?
Arguably the most important, yes, of course.
Coming to that, that the weekend especially, I'm slightly probably very ignorant on the topic, to be very thorough on it, but what is the meaning of Good Friday? A lot of people who are non-Catholic wonder about why is it considered Good Friday, given that Jesus was crucified on that day.
I think that's a beautiful question, and I remember I was teaching grade 2 one time, and my class is quite eclectic, and there was a Muslim student, a young 7-year-old, who put up his hand and said, "Ms. Xavier, I don't understand if Jesus died on Good Friday shouldn't be called Bad Friday. You know, why do Christians call it? And I think that's a very profound question of what's the significance of that. And I think the good really comes with the idea that, well, we foresee the fact that the resurrection is coming, and the goodness in which the crucifixion actually entails of dying on the cross, but the battle, the taking away of the sins, but also battling of death itself. And because of that, for Christians, the goodness is the fact that this human being, but also divine being, has died for us. But in this, death is not the end. The death is actually the beginning of the story, and that is the resurrection, right? And that's why the good is there just to signify what is coming afterwards. That could be one possible interpretation of that.
And I guess coming to Vina, what you were saying earlier of how Jesus' love for mankind was viewed through that good lens, right? And how do you feel?
Well, yeah, his death was arguably horrible. Not arguably, it was horrible. But what that his death symbolized was a good meaning. It was to give us hope that our sins and our, like, he's here for our salvation, and he's willing to do everything he did for our salvation. So through his death, he's kind of freed us from those bonds that we had. And to, like, as Shobana said, it's the message behind it. It's the beginning, not the death is not the end of an era. Unlike like most of us think, the death is the beginning. Yeah.
This past month we also saw I guess is the word beatification of the new Pope, Pope Francis I. What were your thoughts when that announcement was made?
That was not for me, but in general, that was a shocking revelation, because his name was not even mentioned. Probably previous times, yes, but this time his name was not even mentioned. So a lot of expectation for a younger, colored, or someone from a more liberal nature of a pope, younger pope, would be the one, especially someone from the US or from Europe, out of Italy, something like that, or Africa, something like that. But all of a sudden, his name was mentioned, and people are thinking, who is that? Who is this person? So that's a shocking news. But then when we digged into what he has been doing and why he was given a chance, a lot of things came up, and especially his connection to poverty. I think that in itself gives us a lot of message, because from the Latin American world, especially in Argentina, 40% of the population is below poverty line. Around the world, it is the same. Among the Catholics, a lot of people below poverty line is
What do you guys think were the thoughts that were going on during that process when all the cardinals, I'm guessing, were voting on the new pope? What do you think? What do you think, Shobana, were the thoughts behind this? Choosing a pope outside of Europe who's connected to poverty and social activism.
I think there's a lot, and we could speculate a lot in terms of what happened in the actual conclave, right? Because it's very secretive. The cardinals who are chosen for the School of Cardinals, that have been handpicked by, popes in the past, and kind of the ceremony and the secretiveness is quite fascinating in and of itself, and why. If you look at the ratio, and I think Quintus is highlighting something very important, the School of Cardinals, majority-wise, 60% are mainly Europeans. From the Asian continent to the African continent, you have respectively 11% representative, and the Americas about 33% as well. So we could see a majority of the leaders who are leading kind of the thought and the schools of thought and kind of having power of the church is very much maintained in the European context in terms of representation of nationalities of these cardinals, right? And I think Quintus rightly highlighted the fact that if what everybody was going into first was a shock of the fact that, wait, Pope Benedict has just retired. Is that even possible, right? And, in an age of where what is going on, is something happening? A lot of conspiracy theorists are coming up with ideas of why this happened and the reason that it happened. And of course, it's not a surprise to anybody that Vatican itself was riddled with a lot of bureaucratic and institutional problems, right? And what that has meant for the church globally, as well as Vatican specifically, right? As a nation state, as it's been deemed. But that has meant, well, okay, he's retiring and that's a given. But who do we ask to come into this kind of really a big big mess at some point in an institutional level, if we're speaking at that level, you know, social political level. And so picking somebody from the European context or the African continent, Asian context, you need a pope who could actually manage kind of this enterprise. But you also need a pope who can appeal to the people.
Is it connected to, I think now most people accept that there are more Catholics in the South, in like the Southern Hemisphere, than in Europe?
And I think that's true? Yeah, and there's a reflection of that too as well, because you want a pope who's speaking to the diversity of not only to the Europeans, you know, specifically let's say Latin or a German pope in the past, but actually shifting orientation towards where the majority of Catholics may be placed. Continents in the Africas, continents in the Asias, Asian countries and countries in Africa, not continents, but also the Americas as well, right? Because there's a majority of Catholics there. We need somebody who could address that diversity, right? And what that means and their needs, as Quintus is saying, the poverty line. You know.
And on that note of the poverty, you know, a lot of people, beyond just the geography of where Pope Francis is from, is also his attitude towards working with the poor. One of our viewers and former guest, Prakash, wanted to share his thoughts on this, on Pope Francis. So we have a clip with him and his thoughts.
The question of being, you know, to be a good Catholic, if you have to be an activist. Not so much an activist, but in the Catholic doctrine, it's very important to, it's not just faith that is important, but it's also good deeds. It's not so much, to be very clear though, like good deeds don't provide salvation, faith provides salvation, but the fruits of salvation are good deeds. So if you're somebody that's been baptized a Catholic, it's your duty, you know, to kind of pay it forward, to help the homeless. That idea of like in every homeless person, every person in prison, you know, that's where you meet Jesus. So like that's where your connection to God is, through by helping your fellow person. And it comes right from the words of Jesus, in the sense of, you know, the two commandments, to love God with all your heart and to love your brothers and sisters, your neighbor, the same as yourself. So definitely, to be a good Catholic, you have to have a social justice perspective. And you have to be actively, you know, in the community, you know, looking at the people around you and taking care of your community and your neighbors and stepping forward. And you know, the further you push yourself out of that regular comfort of just like, hey, you know, this is my community, I just live here. No, you're actually you have a responsibility to the well-being of your fellow neighbors.
Quintus, on, you know, you're a longtime community activist. What is that connection that, you know, propelled the Vatican choosing Pope Francis, and the connection with social activism?
It is very important because, as Sobana said, bureaucracy is very in a very high level. Inside Vatican, also in many other countries, but we are talking about Vatican in itself. It is very hard to take a breakthrough. It is not easy. There were very powerful men as popes. Before him was Benedict XVI, or before him the John Paul II. They were all powerful popes, but they couldn't take the breakthrough. Prakash was right in saying that the fruits we look at the fruits, the delivery, right, which is very important. And for your question, this pope, he's expected a lot. A lot of expectation is there, but then whether he's going to take the breakthrough, it's a big question. From his past history, his connection to poverty and other things are good, but wisdom, diplomacy, and a higher level of that political breakthrough may be a challenging thing for this pope. We have to wait and see, but it is going to be very challenging when it comes to take a breakthrough in the justice area.
Okay, Veena, as a young Tamil, right? Yeah. You know, and this idea of social activism. You know, you're a university student. You have a lot on your plate. Do you think it's fair, or maybe not fair, but is it a part of being a Catholic, given your busy schedule, to do social work, or is your focus and is your duty towards your family and your schoolwork?
Well,
what do you think?
I don't think there's a clear defined line, definitely, because school is important, education is important, but however, being raised as a Catholic and a Tamil Catholic at that, I was raised by parents who taught me the value of being a good Catholic, and it's not about doing the big things like going to volunteer all the time. Like, sure, that's great if you have the time for it, but just even the small things, like taking care of someone when they're sick, or compassion, which our Pope has shown great amounts of, even before being elected Pope.
That's right.
He used to live with a disabled priest, and he took care of him. It's small things like that. Things like that don't necessarily come to light often, but we do it because it's right, and because that's what, for lack of a better word, what Jesus would do. Jesus spent his entire life taking care of the layperson.
Do you think as a student you can do that, or should your focus be on your schoolwork?
Well, definitely. Like, you could. There's a plethora of things you can actually get involved in.
As
like,
a student,
as a student, like tutoring someone because they're or helping someone with their schoolwork because they don't understand it and you do. Well, if you understand something and you're studying it anyway,
so you feel there's a strong connection between service and faith?
Definitely, because like faith is, as Prakash said, I feel like service is one of those fruits, and like it will help you strengthen your faith. Just going to church every week is not going to make you a better Catholic. Also, getting involved and just being involved in all these areas in the church isn't going to make you a better Catholic on its own. It could, yes, it can help, but I think it's also important to be a good person, to understand that other people are just important in their beliefs, and to respect everyone as you would want to be respected, to love everyone, even if you disagree with their point of view.
Shobana, your thoughts on social activism and faith?
I think one of the important things to keep in mind is, and especially in this transition zone, and especially now with kind of the diverse ideas being presented at the panel, is the diversity in itself within the church, an interpretation of a message of Jesus, and the interpretation of the message of the church, and the interpretation of the message of the Bible. There's no one linear way or correct or authentic way that we could say that this is exactly what Jesus said, and this is exactly the right way to be Catholic, right? And there's many different ways to be Catholic, and many different ways that we may take agendas on, different social activism causes that we may take upon ourselves, right? And those interpretations will vary as much as they're different Catholics, right? For different people, for Catholics, going attending church service weekly and making sure that you have all your sacraments, those important elements of the church. If you have all those, maybe they understand that to be Catholicism, and that is fine. But there might be other people who are very action-oriented and have very much a personal devotion to Jesus that entails treating every person they see on the streets as an embodiment of Jesus, or having the spark of God in them, right? And that's a very different interpretation of the message of Christianity or Catholicism to that person. And they might believe, actually, this is the right way to be Catholic. So we have to steer away from understanding that there's different ways to understand social justices and different ways to understand the messages of Jesus, right? So some people might say, prosperity gospel, Jesus wanted me to be a wealthy person, right? And they may say that's the right form of Catholicism.
Right. And so do you think with with Pope Francis, do you think he'll provide opportunities through his cardinals and through the administrative structure to promote Catholicism vis-a-vis public service, charity? Like, do you foresee that?
And that's very unique to Pope Francis as we see it right now, because he's coming from a particular training of a Jesuit order, which is very much based on social activism, is very much based on service to the poor, right? In the past, with kind of Pope John Paul II or Pope Benedict, they've come from different interpretive lenses. That means different understandings of the message, right? One was a very much trained theologian, right? And so they might have different agendas that they pick up, and that's what they want to stress. And that's actually their idea of being Catholic. And so that diversity in popes historically means that, wow, there's different ways they understand the message of Jesus. And that's probably emblematic of the different ways people on the ground understand their message of Jesus as well. Some might lead to social activism, other might lead to other work that they do for different forms in the community, right? And so that's important to keep in mind.
It's time for a short break. Dear viewers, please join us after these brief advertisements. Welcome back, dear viewers. Today on Crossroads, we're discussing, of course, today is Easter. We're discussing Easter, but also the selection of the new Pope and the Catholic Church in general. please do call us at 416-623-8100 to share your thoughts, your questions, and your own ideas. Just before we left for the break, we're discussing the Pope and the new Pope, Pope Francis I. And I was curious to your, as people are active in the church, especially in our Tamil community, Tamil Catholic community here, as when a new Pope comes in, or even an existing Pope, they have their own agenda and their vision and their ideas for the church. As activists and churchgoers, do you feel that vision making itself known within your own church and your own experience?
I mean, the feeling is there whenever a new Pope is selected, particularly after this Pope is elected. The feeling about his humility, his meekness, his love for poor people, his simplicity, a lot of good virtues that he has is talked about. Too soon to see whether it's already reflected or whether it's already coming down the pipe. We don't know yet. But yes, it is talked about. It is. I mean, they are thinking about it, and they are taking that thoughts in the church preaching or liturgy, and in many other ways. They are trying to take the message from the Pope. The challenge here is the change that people were expecting, on the higher level, because in church there are a lot of cleanup needed inside the church. They think this Pope can deliver that.
And on that topic of the cleanup, as you say, regarding the church and some of the issues, take the ordination of women. Right now, the church doesn't ordain women as bishops, cardinals, or whatnot. How is that viewed within the Catholic community in general? I know it's billion plus, but within the Tamil Catholic community, and I guess the Canadian Catholic community. Like, is there a sense for change?
It's very difficult because that within the Tamil Catholic community, I actually haven't heard anything, and so I'd be curious to say what people's responses would be. Coming from very socially, perhaps, and culturally conservative sensibilities about gender roles, there might be kind of an aversion to it, but it might be different from first generation versus second generation in our community. In terms of the Catholic community as a whole, you're right, we're talking about a point, like over 1 billion people, and diversity of opinions range from anywhere between ultra-conservative to uber-liberal, and where wanting ordination of women is going to be...
Within Canada, what do you think?
Within Canada, again, the same sensibilities. There are probably a lot of people who want it, and there are probably a lot of people who don't, right? And it depends, perhaps it will be an intergenerational issue, depending on ages where you might be somewhat more conservative. And I think the raising of the women's issue is really a matter of issue of equality of women within their church, right? And I think that's speaking to your question is pointing to bigger issues within their church, but also not only the role of women within the church, but also the role of the dwindling numbers of priests within the Catholic Church, right? If priest numbers are dwindling and there aren't people on the grassroots level to take care of the Catholic laity, then we need, what are going to be our solutions, right? How do we deal with the fact that not a lot of men are going into the seminary wanting to take up that life?
Take a leadership role.
Oh, exactly.
Vina, as a young Tamil Catholic, what are your thoughts on the need for cleanup or reform or change? Do you think there needs to be some changes?
Personally, I think that there does need to be a little bit of change here and there. It's not going to happen all at once, obviously.
What changes do you think you would like to see as a...
There are a lot of things that are found in the Bible and that are taught today that are the teachings of, I believe, were set up for a different time. Although the main issues of those teachings, I believe, should stay the same because that's the basis of our religion, I feel like we should also start to see it in a different view, starting to see it through our society's perspective as well. It is an interesting topic to talk about because it's a very complicated, because it's not something you could say cut and clear that you need to change everything in the church, because the church has been teaching everything a certain way.
You think there's a need for a regard for that, maybe not conservative, but for the traditional approach? Do you think there's a need?
I think it's important to keep some of the traditions, because the traditions root us to what we are originally. But on top of that, there's also, I feel, a need to kind of grow from that as well, and try and make smaller changes so that it keeps, like a lot of youth I know that turn around, look at the church and say, I can't do this because it's for an older time and it's not for me. And then they walk away from the church, and they leave all that behind, but they don't seem to get the message. Now, if we can still relay the same message in just a different way, so just the presentation
how about going beyond the presentation, Quintus? Do you feel there are some structural changes that need to be made?
Yeah, look, the world has changed. You know, we are not in the 18th or 19th century anymore, and church has a long way to go. Let's accept it. We all know, and world is talking about it, and media is talking about it. Leaders are talking about it. Equality, women rights, or gay and lesbian rights, or what not. World has changed. We have come to an era where they are considered as equal to anything else, but church in itself hasn't changed yet. Who is going to take that first step? That is where the church is, you know, kind of the tug of war. Not me, maybe the next one, right? So this Pope may set the stage. He may not make all the changes. It's not going to come overnight, but we see it already. He stands up for the change, even in little things within days. He showed that. He is showing some signs. So whether church will also change, I think he's going to.
What are your thoughts on, you know, of the many things that, you know, are up for debate? What are your thoughts on the idea of a married clergy? Like, you know, a lot of other religions allow their religious leaders to marry and have a family. Do you think the celibacy is an important part of?
Let's accept the reality. It has to happen, right? Look at Mother Teresa. She has delivered more than what a pope could have delivered, right? It's a simple fact. Golda Meir, many other leaders, a lot of leaders, especially this pope has come from Argentina, where a woman president is ruling the country, right? Germany, which has the most complex political structure.
Shobana, I'm curious to, you know, these changes that Quintus is speaking about that are necessary or are bound to happen. Do you think that these changes are, or if they are happening and if they will happen, are they because of out of necessity, or do you think that's actually really part of Catholic theology and understanding that these what we think are changes are actually inherently part of Catholic thinking?
I'll have to say, Quintus, I think they'll have to let you into Vatican to start the changes. Some of the things you're suggesting are very important. I think, you know, at the end of the day, the thing with, you know, you look at something that's institutionally and bureaucratically written as a church, theologically, the church founds itself on the idea that it is based on tradition, right? So if you start changing fundamental traditions that it is apparently historically held for such a long time, then the question becomes, you open the floodgates, when do you really close it, right? So, and I'm saying just as an argument from that theological standpoint, right? But Quintus is exactly right. The church and a lot of these tenets, and even the Bible was written in the context of, you know, 6th century or, you know, the 1st century AD, and things have, you know, changed. And a lot of biblical scholars call attention to the fact that when we read sources like that, we have to read them in the context of when they were written, as opposed to understanding it as like never changing and always staying constant, right? And that's important. And you're right. As much as we like to be hopeful about the changes that Pope Francis might come in, the reality he's held quite staunchly on homosexuality and said he doesn't support it, especially when Argentina was going into wanting to reforms and legalize gay and lesbian marriages in the government, right? And so I don't know if it's an age thing, I don't know if it's a training thing or theological orientation. Changes will come, but if we're expecting changes to come at the level of top down as opposed to bottom down, as I think that's where our orientations are different. At the end of the day, yes, Vatican maintains power at a seat, right, and the Pope. And I think that's important as well. And I think a lot of people are expecting, you know, papal bulls and these big announcements to say, yes, you could all of a sudden, we're going to ordain men and women, and where you could get married and all these things. It might be hopeful, and I don't know if, you know,
if change is incremental, right? Like it's a bit at a time. Which area do you think Pope Francis will likely make a change in?
And I think as we're initially seeing is in the terms of reorientation, you know, away from the pomp and kind of the, you know, the ornateness of things and working towards those who really need it, right? And I think what I'm trying to address is the fact that change might not be coming from the top down as we might want to. The change might be needing come from the masses of Catholics across the world who really, in many ways, have the power, right? They're the ones who are filling the churches at the end of the day. Without them, the popes and the bishops, they will just be entities on themselves, and they're really not providing service to anybody, right? And so you have to we look to the Vatican for change, but I think changes are already taking down in the grassroots level. How much of that is actually, in line with the papacy or Vatican might not be
connected to that theme of the grassroots, right? There's some concern within the Catholic Church that some are I don't know if converting is the right word, but they're migrating towards the evangelical Christian megachurches, and we see this in Sri Lanka, we see this in Canada and throughout the world. How much of that is a reality?
It is a reality because it is a challenge for their faith also. I mean, Veena touched on a very important point earlier on, which is the conservative nature of how we feel about the church, right? It is very important. That's the reality. We are talking about dreams, but the reality is such that more conservative people are in the religious area than the liberal part of it. They won't give it up. No, that's the traditional one. We don't want to give it up.
But if they're losing numbers, don't you think that'll?
Yeah, that is where people are expecting change. But then, what kind of change is also important, because too much of change will also a challenge, because you may lose more, right? So yes,
but is there anywhere for the conservatives within the church to go? Like if you start making these liberal changes, and the fear is that the conservatives.
Yeah, it happened because the Second Vatican Council in the 65, when John the 23rd opened that, and Paul the 6th finished it with a huge change, massive change, and what we saw, a huge split. A lot of people, including priests and bishops and cardinals, some of them left the church, but then he stood for what the change that was necessary at the time. That's where the Second Vatican Council brought a lot of changes to.
So this is the Pope before John Paul.
Before that, two popes before that. Pope the 6th finished it, but John the 23rd is the one who, I think 1962 or somewhere there. That was a huge. Not only you can't simply call it a change. It was a massive, it's a up or down. It's a
and this is in the 50s and 60s.
60s and 70s, and another change is expected on a different level now. Whether there will be split, yes. There will be challenges, yes. There will be fights, yes. But then no chance. You have to make the change to face what's happening nowadays with the rise and everything. Yes, there is conservative agenda there, but then you have to face it.
Yeah, like when I mentioned liberal changes earlier, I meant smaller changes. Like I'm not saying all of a sudden change everything about the church and make the mass shorter, because some of the youth, their problem is just that I don't want to spend the 1 hour at church every Sunday, right? But what I am saying is smaller changes, just how they present. Like, for example, a huge part of the Mass, in my opinion, is the homily. And just how it's presented, like the gospel is interpreted to the people. I feel like that's going to make a huge difference. Because I have heard homilies where I've just sat there and been like, I don't.
What is a homily?
Oh, it's the
preaching.
The preaching.
The service.
Yeah, sorry about that. I've been in homilies where I've sit there and been like, he's just restating everything that happened in the gospel. And I understood the gospel, and I've heard this gospel many times because we go on a 4-year cycle. So I've heard this, and I don't really, okay. But then I've also heard homilies or preachings that have let me, I've sat there and been like, wow, I have never thought of it this way before. And have really opened my eyes. So it's those small things like that, I feel like, is going to make a difference in the church, even if it's a small step. Like, I feel like
do you think that comes down to the leadership of the church and
the training,
pastor,
yes,
the priest,
a little bit, but Pope Francis, what he's done so far has been these really small, very they haven't been extravagant changes. He's done stuff like one of his preachings right now is that individual Catholic has to make an honest and authentic attempt to become a better person. So if every church and every priest like not enforce that, but kind of
produces that in their life, it'll be shown as a model,
a chain
and as
effect,
an example.
right?
Yeah, that's right.
And honestly, if we can all do that, just every single person, just an honest and authentic attempt to become better people, we can make this world a better place, which is also wonderful.
And keep the numbers that the church is looking to keep.
Yeah, I believe that to be true.
It's time for a short break. Dear viewers, please join us after these short announcements. Welcome back, dear viewers. Today on Crossroads, we're examining Easter, the Catholic faith in general, and some of the challenges, as well as the selection of the new Pope. Joining us, we have Shobana Xavier, Vuna Philip, and Quintus Thursingham. Just before we left from the break, we're discussing some of the challenges the youth face. And I'm curious, and I think all of us are curious too, how is the second generation interpreting Catholicism that's different from the first generation, and how Tamil Catholicism has been practiced in Sri Lanka?
Catholicism is a beautiful religion, very tolerant. It preaches love, and it voices for justice and social justice and a lot of other things. And it's a religion where it doesn't give punishments to people who make mistakes. On the contrary, it forgives and forgets and asks them to repent and come back. So, which is a beautiful theology there, beautiful philosophy there. So, it's a very tolerant religion where people have their own freedom to choose their own life. It is not restricting them to do this, don't do this. In general life.
So, do you think that'll connect with the youth?
Yeah. So, that will, definitely connect with the youth. The problem here is for the youth, the challenges of the modern world and the technology and whatnot is so high, so much that they are distracted. But then whether religion is doing enough to attract them or to engage them,
is that the biggest challenge?
That is the biggest challenge. And in Catholicism, Veena rightly said that in the church sometimes the preaching, the message is missing or not enough of it. So that's a sad side of it. That's where we need more people who are vocal, who are not only intelligent but who can cross the message. That kind of challenge is there.
Shobana, what do you feel as a second generation Toronto Tamil Catholic? What do you see? What issues are playing out within the second generation?
I think there's a lot of identity politics, if we could want to put it in that way. The Tamil Catholic community in Toronto has fought for a really long time to establish their own bases, which is at, the Teresa of Little Flower, which is Our Lady of Good Health Parish by Kingston and Scarborough. And so masses are done in Tamil. And the challenge now is that as first generation have kind of settled, you have now a new influx of second generation, third generation who are either brought up or born in Canada and who are, going through the process of, let's say, going to Catholic schooling, right? And that's what's fascinating. And the point of view is that Tamil Catholics are very much part of a majority community, a Christian community in Toronto, right? And in Canada largely, which is Catholic. And so they're able to participate in Catholic schools, get that education about religion. But it puts children, and especially second generation and third generation Tamil Catholics, in somewhat of a weird limbo space, where we call it like a liminal space, which is that, religiously they're part of a majority, but ethnically and linguistically they're part of a minority that's not only displaced, but a diasporic, perhaps, refugee community who's suffering from a post-Civil War context. And so that kind of engagement with how much of it they invest back in the Tamil Catholic community, how much of they invest in just a Catholic community.
And do you see that? Are more of the second generation looking into a Catholic community as opposed to a Tamil Catholic?
And there might be shifts in that. Young people might be going towards that. And a lot of that will depend on how things like, let's say, if they, they decide not to be religious at all, and they might just leave the churches altogether. They might feel that they're doing a cultural obligation as opposed to a religious obligation. Or they might even feel that, through ongoing processes of becoming more westernized or Canadian, through intermarriages and things like that, losing of the language, right? These may be impediments that may stop them from participating in the Tamil Catholic community. And this is where the pastoral community has to really look down and see, well, what is it that we can do to still involve the young people in the church? You know, do we do half masses in Tamil and English so the young people actually understand?
So does that, how much does that play a role, Vuna? Like mass in Tamil and mass in English?
Well, as someone who's been a part of a Tamil Catholic church my entire life, I can't remember when I wasn't. I grew up, and when I was a child, like they had children liturgy services. For us, that's more important when I was a kid because.
And was it in Tamil or in English?
The liturgy services were in English. So when after the opening prayers, the kids would go downstairs and their readings would be read to them in English until they got a really good grasp on the Tamil language. They got a good foundation of Catholicism in that reading, where the youth leaders, which are now us, they would display a message to them in a way that was relatable. So they got a message when we were children, and now we're relating a message to these children.
Right. And now is it more in like when they have youth sermons? What do you connect better with?
Well, now that we're older, some of us stay in the mass because we actually have that grasp on Tamil, the Tamil language, and so we can stay up here and we can stay upstairs, realistically, and listen to the homily or the preaching. But there's also the strengthening of youth groups now, which I've really noticed in my parish personally. The youth groups kind of motivate us to come to church because we've kind of formed our own connections with each other, right? We've become friends, and we come to church for God, but being able to be there with other people your age,
it creates a stronger bond.
Exactly. If you're going to church where everyone is older than you, then you start feeling a little bit discouraged, and you're like, okay, I'm kind of the youngest one here. I don't want to be here, you know. And so when there's a larger group of younger people kind of getting involved in different areas as well, kind of getting. So
the role of youth group is an important part of the church.
I believe it really is.
Because of time, I just want to get into the topic of Sri Lanka and how Catholicism there and the connection between the diaspora and Sri Lanka. There's a clip I want to share by Prakash, who wanted to make the connection between the two.
To say a prayer for their, God's protection and blessing on this Easter, especially Easter, because Easter is the date, and it's the holiest day of the Catholic Church, where even in defeat, God provided victory. Even though Jesus was killed at the hands of both empire and local powers that be, and he was killed, and the struggle was over. It was, everything was for naught. 3 days later, this Sunday and Monday, Jesus rose again, showing that even in death, when God is on your side, there is always hope. So that and the prayers for all of our brothers and sisters back home, our Muslim brothers and sisters that are being attacked, our Catholic and Christian ones, and our Hindu ones, they're all suffering.
As we all know, the situation for our people in Sri Lanka is very dire and very bad. How is the connection, Quintus, in terms of faith between the Catholic community here and Sri Lanka?
In here, the Catholic community is very strong. Where I am going to church, where I also see Vina's family, Sobana's family, Sobana's cousins, and everyone is there, and they're all active. Why I am saying this is a huge youth involvement there, which is very encouraging for us. Right? In the past, that was not the case for a while, but that has come back. So it's a win-win situation now. We see the youth, we see the children, kids. Everyone as a family coming in and doing a lot of things. So the Catholic Church here, as a Tamil Catholic Church, is very strong and active. And
in the sermons and the homilies, is there a connection with the suffering that Tamil Catholics are facing?
Most certainly, yeah, definitely. Not only in the sermon, not only in the homilies, even in prayer of the faithful or message, other parts where they discuss with children what is happening back home. A lot of message, a lot of sympathy, a lot of concern is there for among the youth, which is very encouraging. And just to quote what has happened, just to mention what has happened a couple of months back, youth arranged a program within the church. I mean, they arranged and they took the message with them, where the suffering of our people back home, how much suffering is there, and how we can help them out, right?
And
how we can,
it.
how we can bring the message out. And they showcased that completely youth program, which is very encouraging. I think Nesipaya or something.
Thank you, Quintus. Thank you, Vuna and Shobana. Thank you very much for making your time. That's all the time we have for today. Dear viewers, thank you for tuning into Crossroads on TVI. We'd like to leave you with a song titled Mary Did You Know, performed by Melanie Ratnam. We hope you enjoy it and remember Jesus' message for all humankind when he left his mortal coil 2,000 years ago. Happy Easter and God bless you.
Mary, did you know that your baby boy would one day walk on water? Mary, did you know that your baby boy would save our sons and daughters? Did you know that your baby boy has come to make us new? And the child that you delivered will soon deliver you. Oh, Mary, did you know that your baby boy would give sight to a blind man? Mary, did you know that your baby boy would calm a storm with his hand? Did you know that your baby boy has walked where angels trod? And when you've kissed your little
தரணியில் தமிழரின் பிம்பம் உங்கள் டிவி.